Awesome. Welcome, friends. It is week one, not lecture one. What is going on with me today? Sorry. Week one, lecture two. Now, normally we won't do a full-on lecture. It's just I want to make sure that you guys have enough information so that way when you're doing your assignments this week, you guys have all the info. So usually on the first lecture, we go a little bit, we talk about Discord and our class calendar and all the class stuff. So we kind of ate up in too much of our time, so I want to make sure that we are good to go today. So what we're going to be talking about is our lists, dictionaries. If you guys have done anything with JavaScript, you know these as arrays or objects, just a different name. They operate the same way. I forgot the T here. Conditional statements and then loops. If we get the chance, we'll do that. And if we can, we'll get to functions, but this is a pretty heavy stack. So I want to make sure that we are all aware of this. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. I will do this every single class or office hour, whenever we have class. I will make sure that I do this. It's just to remind you that you have a discussion question on due on Sunday. So you just have one. So please go make sure you do that. It's open. If you have any issues, please let me know immediately. There's nothing I can do if you miss it. And you can only miss just a few before you have to retake the course or have to get dismissed or anything like that. So please make sure you do discussion questions. You've got core assignments due as well. So if we're looking at that, those are again all due on Sunday. And the core assignments that we've got is organize as files and our for loop basic one. So that's what we're going to talk about today is a lot of the stuff. So that way you guys have the information and you guys are aware of how you can do that. Cool. Just as a reminder, Monday's a day off for Coding Dojo. So if you guys are needing help with from me, or if you're needing help from any TAs, we will be off. So, you know, just if you're wondering why you're not getting an answer from me or from Discord, that's the reason why is we are off on Monday. One thing I did want to say is Kevin and I had a great office hour where we walked through some of the stuff we're going to talk through today. Maybe in a little bit more advanced. If you guys are ever wondering if it is something that I'm like, oh, I think that other people would benefit from, I do record those. And so today's was recorded. What'll happen is at the end of class, I will, after class is done, once I exit Zoom, it'll start downloading all of my recordings. And then I will post that to YouTube and I'll set that link here. So if you guys are ever wondering where the office hour links are, it's just here where it says office hour. Once it looks like this, it's got the little blue. You can tell that this is a YouTube link. Same thing with our class. So class will always be there. Like the last classes, this was it right there. So yeah, again, that's where office hours will be. And that today's was on lists and dictionaries and how do we iterate through a list of dictionaries. So it's a great office hour. Plus that code will be here. So again, if you're wanting to have the code, I can invite you to GitHub. Again, it's a private repository. I can invite you though. And then all I need is your username or your email address. Feel free to private message me or email me that information. I can make sure I get you added and then you'll have access to all the code. Everything that we do in class, I just push to GitHub. So that way you guys can use it to study and kind of refer back if you are watching the videos. Cool. Any questions on some of this housekeeping stuff, admin stuff? Okay, let's go ahead and jump in. I want to talk about, first and foremost, I want to start off with lists. Does anybody know kind of what a list or an array is? Anybody give me like a definition of that?
So basically, a list is one of those composite data types
Yeah.
where you can have like multiple uh, um, primitive
Yeah.
data types
Mm-hmm.
in one composite data type.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's a collection of data types. So one thing I will say is, just like we did in office hour, you can also have a list of composite data types, right? I can have a list of dictionaries. I can have a list of lists. That
Mhm.
works well. So it's just a way that we can bundle up a whole bunch of different pieces of information. So what we can do is we'll go ahead and even just kind of build off the office hour thing. We'll just have a list of names. So let's just create a list. way I'm going to do that is I'm going to call it sum list. Now list is a keyword in Python, so that's why it turned yellow. And so you might, you want to make sure, like I say, listy a lot, just because it's not the
Mhm.
keyword of list. But the way that we do this and help Python identify and interpret, okay, they're talking about a list, is we have these square brackets here. Square brackets here. Now, in the
Mhm.
same way that we talked about our primitive data types, how numbers have certain methods and functionalities, and how strings have different methods and functionalities, lists operate in a different way, right?
Mhm.
They can do different things, they can say different things, they can act in a different way as well. So I'm just going to say this. Now, one big thing about lists to know is the way that we identify values within a list. The way that we identify values is because we don't have access to what all of our data says, right? So I can look at this here and I can visualize, oh yeah, there's the 3, right? Or yeah, if I'm trying to find the 3, I could say, oh, there it is right here. But when we're dealing with data, we don't actually see that. And our computer's doing a whole bunch of calculations under the hood. And so what we have to do is we have to give it an identifier of where a value is. Now, what we call that identifier is, put my annotate tool, is our index position. So it's called an index position. Now, this is the same thing as an array. So if you operates in a very similar way, but one thing to note is it always starts at 0. So what an index position does is it just kind of keeps track of the different values and where they're at. So the first value in an array always starts at 0, or in a list, sorry. Array and list are the same thing, just array in JavaScript, list in Python. And then it goes up sequentially. So it's got 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, sorry. Let me backtrack that. 3 and 4. Now notice, because we start at 0, if we are going up, incrementally 1 to 5, this last value, it's always going to be 1 minus that, or this value minus 1 is going to be its index position. But this gives us a lot of power, right? Because now if I want to see, okay, there's the 3, if I want to just get the 3, I can target that, right? If I wanted to just print that, I can say, hey, that value at index position 2, right? And then the computer says, okay, cool, let me go grab where that's at. You sort of think about a vending machine, right? Where you say, okay, you're looking at a bunch of Cokes or Pepsis or whatever, and you want a cherry Coke Zero. It's like my guilty pleasure. I love cherry Coke Zero. I can put in A54 and the little thing will kind of, and it'll go and it'll grab that Coke there at that specific position and it'll bring it to me and I can retrieve it. Same sort of idea with indexes. What it does is it allows me to identify a piece of information or say, hey, go retrieve that at this place, and then my computer can do that. So the way I might do that is I might say print. I type in the list that I want to target. So in this case, it's some list, and then I just give it the index position. So if I wanted 3, I'm going to give it 2, right? I'm going to give it 2, 0, 1, 2. So if I run this, let's open up my terminal. If I were to say Python 3, let me say main.py. Now if I run this, I get the number 3. 3. Cool. If I wanted to get 5, what index position would I put here? What number would I put here?
4.
You would put 4.
3. Then on the right.
Exactly. I put 4. Remember, oops. There we go. It goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? To grab that there. Now, in this same idea, let's say that I had something like this. I've got a list, and within that, there is also another list. Now, can anybody tell me how would I just get this list right here? Could I do?
Sum list, brackets 5.
Yeah, exactly, right? That gets me that entire, oh, I did it again. That gets me that entire list. Now, what if I wanted to get the 7 out of that list?
5, and then another bracket, you would put a 1.
Exactly. So when I have this is a nested list. You can sort of think about those Russian nesting dolls, right? Where one's inside of another. Same sort of idea. When I have this, I first have to say, okay, go get this value. It says, okay, cool, I've retrieved it, and say, now go in there and get this value. And so this would give me 7. Great job. Now you could keep doing that, right? This could have a list inside of it. This has a list inside of it, and then you just keep doing that. You could do that. That'd be a lot, but you could do that. So the same sort of functionalities there. One thing I do want to point out is I can have other things in there to where I can have different data types, and a list allows me to compile all of those together. Cool. Are there any questions on lists and how they operate and how they work? How we would retrieve a piece of information from it? Put a 1 in the chat if this is all making tons of sense.
Quick question. Will,
Yeah, of course.
would you please repeat about like you see print some list 5?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now the 1 especially.
Yeah, of course. So when I say sum list 5, if we just were to, do this, we can see that I say it gives me this value here, right? If I am going to annotate, draw, I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right?
Oh,
So when I
okay.
say sum list of 5, it gets me this value here.
Oh, so that's the nested, right?
Yeah, this is a nested list. So if I want to go within that value, saying, okay, now that I've got 5, instead of saying something like, you know, one way to do it would be like nesty list equals sum list 5, and then saying, print nesty list 1, right? That's another way to get it. But that's kind of creating a lot, right? That's creating a variable that I'm creating and it's taking up space. So what I can do is instead of doing that, I could just say sum list 5. That's going to give me back this entire list and say, okay, once you have that list, I want you to go in there and I want you to grab the value at index position 1.
Oh, okay.
It says, okay, great. And then it gets me 7.
Yeah, understood. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, my pleasure. Estrella, is this making sense to you? Perfect. Great. Now, you could see that we'll get into slicing later. But let's say that I had something like this. I had, some person, equals John Doe, software engineer. Perfect, right? This is great. This is a collection of information. Maybe this is a human. But this doesn't give me the full story of who John Doe is, right? What is 46? Is that their age? We could assume that. Is that how many donuts they've eaten today? We don't know, right? It's just a normal number. What is New York? Is it the place they live? Or is it a place they've always wanted to visit? So a list might fall short when we are trying to capture some information or be able to refer back to it, right? A list is great for storing certain things, but there's other data types that maybe give us a better understanding of our data, which I want to introduce something called, a dictionary. Nope. Cool. What a dictionary does is it allows me to, in this example, assign what we call a key or maybe a reference type to what my data means. So in this case, when I say some person, what I can put is I can put, instead of a square bracket, which Python will interpret as a list, I put a curly bracket. I will often refer to them as curly boys, just because I heard somebody say that once and I thought it was really funny. Now, when Python sees that, it says, oh, I want a dictionary and not a list. So one thing to remember is lists identify, I'm going to say this, identify objects. And objects just mean values by index position. Dictionary identifies by objects or values by a key. And so what I can do is I could say something like first name is my key. Its value is John. Last name is my key. Value is Doe. Now, one couple things I want to point out. A key here is a string. It's separated by a colon. And then on the other side is its value. Now you can see that that does not always have to be a string. It could be a dictionary. It could be a list. It could be a whole bunch of different data types. It could be a Boolean. It could be a number, a float, or an int, a float. It could be any of those. But here we want to keep these as strings.
So
And
the
so
so
what?
the key,
Go ahead.
yeah, so really quick, the key is to the left of the colon is always a string. The
Mhm.
value to the right of the colon could be a string, an integer, a float, or a
Mhm.
boolean.
Or a list or a dictionary. It could be any of that, right? In the same way that within my list, I can have composite data types as well. In a dictionary, my value can be whatever I need it to be. And you'll see this to where it'll often be another dictionary. Like if we were to say something like address, something like this, how it's actually got its value is another dictionary.
Right.
So,
But to the left, the key is always a string, correct?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yep, exactly. But now this helps my data make a little bit more sense, right? Because now I know that location is, or maybe we'll even take this out. Instead of it just saying New York, we can just say address, right? Okay, this gives me they live in New York, not just places they've wanted to visit. 46 is the age, not how many slices of pizza they've had in their life, right? So it gives a little bit more information and allows me to refer and set up my data in a much better way. This is something you should absolutely learn. You are going to need this because anytime we're dealing with APIs and data, oftentimes we're getting them in a dictionary format. So we'll need to understand key value pairs. So the way that if, again, in the same way that I can say some list and I just put a colon, and then I put the index position, I can grab pieces of information from my object. Let me click out of this so we can do that. So I'm going to say print. Now all I do is I say some person, and then this is a little bit confusing, and it confused me when I first learned it as well. Is you put a bracket here. You would think it'd be a curly boy, but it's not. It's a bracket. And then I can say last name, or I can get the key name of my dictionary. And so what that's going to do is when I say print some person at last name, at this key of last name, it is going to retrieve its value. It's going to go retrieve that value. So let me that out. So if I split terminal. Cool. So if I come get this, it says Doe. Right? It goes and it grabs my the value at last name, retrieves it, and gives it back to me. Now, in the same way that we can grab multiple values within my list by doing this, right? By going in, getting that value, and then getting the value within that. I can do the same thing. So if I wanted this city, I could say something like address, comma, or address. So it's going to go get me this object. And then if I want to go in and drill in even more, I just put another bracket and then the key name, and it's going to give me back New York. Come here. Gives me back New York. How are we feeling with objects or dictionaries and lists? Two very common things that we'll deal with.
It seems easy. I'm sure it'll get confusing once we're doing it until we get
Sure.
kind of the hang of it.
Actually,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I would say it looks way much easier just watching you doing it until we start doing it too.
Yeah, that's how it
Yeah.
always goes. I deal with that, just so you guys know. I'll watch a video on how to write in some
Yeah.
other language. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And I go do it. And I'm like, how the heck do I do this again? So it's not just you guys. It's a very normal thing. You're A-okay there. And we're going to get plenty of practice with this. And that's what we'll start on Thursdays. We'll start doing more algorithms. That gets us a lot more practice with this. Okay. What I want to talk about are conditional statements because they're going to be crucial and key for you being able to do your assignments. And then we're going to talk about, and then we'll talk about functions and loops. Cool. Great. What a conditional statement does is I can say something like this: age equals 21, right? That is my value. Age is 21. What I can say is if, and if is a key word within Python that says, okay, a conditional statement is coming. And I can do some sort of evaluation of my data. So in this case, I'm saying if age, which in this case is a variable, is greater than or equal to 21. Now, this is my condition. This is what we call my condition. And this is either going to render me one of two things. Anybody know? Anybody have a guess? What primitive data type do you think would have?
A Boolean.
Yeah, exactly. It is either going to be true or it's going to be false. There is no in between, right? It either is true or false. Now, if it's true, if the condition is true, then we enter into my if statement and do whatever it says. Now, Python operates on code blocks. And this idea called code blocks, where in JavaScript, we would say, function, test. And then I would do some sort of curly bracket, and everything that lived within the curly bracket was what was associated to my function, right? With Python, we don't do curly brackets at all. And so it's a little bit more challenging for the computer to understand, well, what belongs to my function and what's just other pieces of code. The way that it does that is by doing a code block, an indentation. This is tabs versus spaces. It's always 4. And so I like to tab. Some people, this is a legitimate thing. Some people like to do spaces. That doesn't make sense to me. But when we write our conditional statement, we have our if, that's our keyword. That's how it always starts, is with if. We have our condition, do a colon, and then anything that belongs to that conditional statement is indented, or to that condition is indented. So it's going to say if age is greater than or equal to 21, it's going to print you can drink. So let's go ahead and comment this out. And we can see our condition working here. It says you can drink. Now, if I were to change this to 20, we run our condition again, nothing happens. That's because this was not true, right? Age is not greater than or equal to 21. Therefore, it did not enter into my conditional statement and do whatever it says. In this case, print you can drink. That's not always great if it doesn't do something, right? And it just leaves kind of empty. I might be like, is this working? Is it not? I don't really know. And so we can expand our conditional statements. We could do something like else. And what else is basically saying, okay, if this doesn't work, if this is not true, well, then I want you to go ahead and do this. So if the person's not 21, I want you to put, you cannot drink. So we clear this and I run Python 3. We get, you cannot drink. Python created this variable. It checked it and said, is it greater than or equal to 21? It's not. So it does not enter on line 32. It just skips it. And then it goes to line 33 and it says, okay, I've entered an else, or I see an else. Now notice I don't have to put a condition. It's kind of a catch-all. So anytime Python gets to an else, it will go and do that code every time. It'll do that code every single time. Now, there's one more thing we can add in when we're dealing with conditional statements. And that is called elif. That is basically another option. So I'm going to say something like this. Okay. Now, this if statement starts my conditional chain. My conditional, it's called a chain method. Or chain, sorry, conditional chain, not chain method. It starts that, right? Elif exists within the confines of my conditional chain. You do not ever start anything with an elif that doesn't work. It only can come after an if statement. And we can have as many elifs as we want. We're going to have a whole bunch of them. In this case, we just need one, but I could have multiple elifs if we want. Now, what this will do is this will first, again, create age. It'll go and say, if age is greater than 21, you can drink. Elif, age equals 21. It'll print you are 21. And if it gets down to here, it's going to say, yeah, you can't drink. You're too young. So if I come here and I say age equals 21, what do you think it's going to print? Anybody have any
You are
guesses?
21.
I was gonna say, you can drink.
Okay, so I've got a you are 21. I've got a you can drink. Jeffrey, what do you think? You're the tiebreaker.
Actually, yeah, I was about to say you can drink too.
Okay, let's see
You
what
are
it does.
21.
Oh, it says you are 21. Kevin, why? You were on the you are 21 train. Why is it you are 21 and not you can drink?
Because it's not greater than or equal to. It's if age is greater than or 21. Well, 21 is not greater than or 21. 21 is equal to 21.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
therefore, since it's if age is greater than or 21, well, that's not true. So it
Yeah.
skips that and goes on to the elif, and
Mhm.
age equals 21 evaluates to true, so it prints you are 21.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Remember I said that it gets to this else. If Python reads this else, it'll always print that. Why didn't it print you cannot drink?
Because it already found something that will evaluate it that satisfies its condition.
Exactly. And that's a great point that I wanted to make. When we have a conditional statement, you can think about it like a chain, right? Conditional chain. The minute our statement, this could be 100-line long and you could have 98 elifs. The moment that our statement, our conditional chain, finds something that is evaluated to true, it skips the rest of them. It skips the rest of them. And so that's why we don't even read this, because this evaluated to true. Now, in the same way that if I were to do this, both of these are correct, right? Age is equal to 21. That's true. It's greater than and equal to 21. But let's see. We just get you can drink. We just get this. And that's because this one, this first one, evaluated to true, because age is not greater than, like Kevin pointed out, but it is equal to 21. Therefore, it enters into that and it skips the rest, even though this is still true. It doesn't even read it. It just totally skips it and goes on to line 37.
Because the first one it satisfies is
Mhm.
satisfied with the condition.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Now, one thing I want to point out is anytime we are declaring a new value, we just use a singular equal sign. Anytime we are comparing values, we're doing a comparison operator, it is a double equal sign. So what this is doing is this elif is comparing age to 21. It uses double equals. Sometimes students think that you can just use one equals, or up here they use double equals. Double equals is a comparison operator. Single equal is a declarative operator. It's for declaration. You're declaring a value, or hey, this variable is now equal to 21. So just wanted to point that out. We have, just want to kind of point out our operators. We have greater than, we have less than. Oops. Oops. Oh my gosh. Less than. We have equal to. We have greater than or equal to. We have less than or equal to. And then the last one we have is not equals. So if you see this exclamation equal sign, it's saying, hey, if age does not equal 21, then I want you to enter you can drink. So with this, if I were to run it, oh, I didn't save. It says you are 21, right? Because it comes here and it says if age is not equal to 21. Well, it is 21, so they are equal. So this is not true. Go straight in here. Oh, age is equal to 21. Okay, it prints you are 21. Okay. Make sure that you guys have that in your notes. Are there any questions on conditional operators?
I have a question, Will.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have something called operations, or do we ever use some?
What do you mean? Like the method sum?
No, like operations and the conditions.
Conditional operators?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what these are right here. That's what we were just talking about. These guys here. Are you
Oh,
talking about, is
the
that in, let's see. Should be here. Yep, right here. Comparison and logic operators. These guys.
yeah.
It's a whole list here. Now, right now, I'm just doing one value here, or one comparison.
I
One thing
see.
I want to note is you can add in multiple by using and. And if I use and, that means that they both have to be true in order for it to enter. If I use or, that means either of them, just as long as one of them is true. And I can have multiple ands and multiple ors within it. And then I can also say not. not. And so instead of saying age not 21. Nope, that's incorrect. But I could say if age is equal to 21 or age is greater than or equal to 21, then I can say something like this. It'll say you can drink, right? Because, but maybe if I still say 22, should still say you can drink, right? Because that is not true. 22 does not equal 21. But because I used or, I just have this one is true. It's greater than 21. So because I used or, only one of them has to be true. Now, if I said something like this, and maybe I say something like age and then name. First name equals John. If I were to say something like this, I could say if age is greater than or equal to 21 and first name is equal to John, I could say, John, you know that you're not welcome here. Right? So these both have to be true. First name has to be John because I did and age has to be greater than or equal to 21 in order for this to enter in and do that. So it says, John, you were not welcome here. But if this is 20, I come here, you see that though the first name is John, this condition is not true, so it does not enter in. Nor are they 21, so it goes all the way down to you cannot drink. Cool. Any questions on conditional statements? Now, the only thing that can exist by itself is just an if statement. You could have something like if first name equals John. You could say something like print hello, John. And then I can go on with my code. You know, it doesn't, I can keep doing anything. So an if can live by itself. Elif and else must be under the umbrella of an if. If must always precede those. Are there any questions on that?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Sounds good now.
Oh, one
Perfect.
really quick question. How do you comment out multiple lines at once?
Yeah, so the way you could do it, there's two ways you can do multiple lines. You can highlight them and then press Command or Control and then the question mark. And that'll do it. The other way is that'll make them all a single line comment by having the hashtag. The other thing you could do, there's a little trick, is if you have three, if you wanted to have a multi-line comment, just like this, you just have to put 3 quotation marks at the beginning, 3 quotation marks at the end, and then even if I didn't have these, just like this. Having the 3 quotation, again, you could do single or double, that'll give a multi-line comment, so it won't read that either. But the faster way is honestly just to highlight and then do command question mark, and then it'll comment them all out for you. Okay, I got two more things I wanna bring up. First one is functions. So I want to talk about functions just on a very, very high level, how to create a function because your assignment needs that. And really all a function is just like the computer says, it's just a block of code that performs a specific task. Now it's a block of code that we create. When Python reads a function, it does not run it immediately. It only runs it when it's called. So what it'll do is it'll see it and say, oh, I remember that. And then when we call it later on throughout our code, it goes, oh, I know what I need to do anytime it's kind of a keyword. In the same way that when we declare a variable, we're not doing anything with it yet. Python's just remembering that value. Same sort of thing with a function. Now, in order for us to create a function, we have a couple of different things. Let's just have this as our first function. When we say def is the key word for Python to know, okay, this is a function. So in the same way with JavaScript, the keyword was function. Python was like, that's way too long. Let's just use def. So def is declaring that this is a function. Then we have something here called a function name. And this is how we want to, whenever we refer back to our function, say, hey, I want you to run that code. This is our keyword, right? This is our word to say, hey, I want you to go ahead and run that. This is our function name. Now, we talked about this in office hour. We still stick with snake case within our function name, still stick with all lowercase. Then we have these 2 parentheses, which we'll get to those in just a second. And then a colon. And that declares, okay, anything under this colon that is indented before it gets to a line that's, no longer indented, print 3. So it's going to assign anything that is indented or 4 spaces to this function. In the same way that we're dealing with conditional statements, same sort of thing. That's just throughout Python in general. Now within our function, we're saying, okay, this is what we want it to do. We just want it to print hello. That's all our function. It's a pretty basic function that it prints hello. And so now my function is created. Now, if I were to run this code, nothing happens, right? Because though I've created my function, Python does not run this until I call, or the correct verbiage would be I invoke my function. And so what I do, all I have to do is say hello with my parenthesis. I don't have to make a variable. I don't have to do anything. I just call the name that I said, okay, remember this value at this name. When I call that, then go ahead and do that. When I invoke my function, all I do is now it goes, and once it gets to line 49, it stops what it's doing. It goes up to my function or however it remembered it. And then it runs and does whatever my function says. So I am saying and declaring, hey, this is a function. Here's my function name, followed by parentheses. We're going to see what that does here in a second. A colon. And then anything that's code blocked under it, so it has the 4 spaces or the tab, is part of that function block. And then in order for it to actually run the function, I just call the function name. Are you hungry, girl? Cool. So those parentheses, what do those mean? Well, within functions, sometimes I want to give it some data in order for my function to do something with it, right? Maybe my function has some sort of functionality that I want to do something with data. And so what I can do is within that parentheses, I can pass it what we call a parameter, right? Saying, hey, I'm expecting in order for this to run, I'm expecting for this, in order for this to work, you're going to need some sort of value. Now, this portion here, this parameter, that it can be named anything you want it to be. It is just referring to the data that's passed in. So this could be called unicorn or cupcake. It does not matter. We want to make sure we name our parameter names because when we're referring back, it's a little bit easier for us. We want to name them something good, but this could be unicorn if I want it to be. Does not matter. It's just referring to the data that I'm passing in. Now, because we're assigning whatever data we're getting, we're saying I want to refer to that as name throughout my function. I can just refer to that value and it will give me any, whatever I pass through. And so in this case, I've got a function def. My name is say hello with name. It's expecting some value to be passed in and saying, when I get that value, let's refer to it as name. Then it is printing using an F string and it's saying hello, and then whatever name I'm given. So if I wanted to call this, I could say hello with John. Right? I'm calling my function. My function needs a value to be passed in. In this case, I'm passing in John. And so it should say hello, John. And it does. I'm going to pause right there. Are there any questions on that? You guys put a 1 in the chat if this is making sense. Put a 0 if it does not. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Estrella. Okay, perfect. Now the last thing I want to talk about is for the next 9-ish minutes is for loops. Oops. Now, you guys did for loops in JavaScript, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So then we don't have to go through the nuances of it. I'm just going to tell you how to write it in Python versus JavaScript. In JavaScript, we had to write something like, for, and then I had to say something like this, right? Where I said but I had to say like let I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, console log I, all that stuff. It's a lot. In Python, it's a little bit easier. All we have to say, there's 2 things we can do. I can say for I. Again, I can be anything we want. Then I say in range. Now I'm going to do something first. 1. Okay. What for I in range is doing is range is just going to increment. It's just a method that is just going to handle our numbers. Anytime we're dealing with numbers or numerical values, range says, okay, I want you to iterate through to a for loop. And it gives me 3 different things to do. Oops, I don't want to do that. It gives me my start, my stop. See if I can. There we go. So it gives me, where do I want to start? Well, I'm going to start at 0, right? If I want to get all the numbers through 1 through 10, then I want to start at 0. When do I want to stop? Well, this is up to, but not including, right? So if I wanted all my numbers through 10, I need to go to 11. And then step is how much do I want to increment by? How much do I want to increment by? So all we have to do is say for I in range, we have our start, our stop, and our step. So it's already a little bit easier than JavaScript. See, we have 0, because that's where we're starting, all the way through 10. But wait, it gets easier. So what I can say is for I in range, I don't want to deal with that. And instead of putting 1, I can just put 0 and 11. Now what that's doing is that's just my start and my stop. And what this is doing is this is using the method of range, and the method of range has what we call a default parameter. Default parameter. Now up here, when we're dealing with our functions, we said that, hey, name needed to be passed in. In order for this function to work, it needed a value. I could say, hey, if nobody passes in a name, let's just refer to it as John. Worst case scenario, let's default to John, right? So even if I were to kind of go back, and let's say I didn't pass in a value, I just called the function. And I run this, I get hello, John. Though I didn't pass in a value, this defaults to John. But if I do pass in a value, in this case, Jane, it will overwrite the default value and it gives me hello, Jane. That's what we call a default parameter. Cool. In the same way, range for step has a default is 1. It's saying, okay, I want to increment by 1 each time. So I actually don't have to pass in that value. It will allow me to default to 1. So unless I wanted it to be something different, like 2, 3, 5, whatever, then I would have to pass in that value. But if I just wanted to increment by 1, which most of the time we will always do 1, I can just pass in my start and my stop, and this will still run just like we want it. All the way up through 10 by 1. So now you can see, okay, Python for loop is getting much, much easier than our JavaScript for loop. But we can get even better. I could say I in range 11. And this will still do the same thing. It just is my stop. And my start default is 0. And my step or my increment default is 1. That is good as we can get. So if I just pass in where I want to stop, I will still get all that. So you can see how this is a little bit easier, right? A little bit easier to iterate through instead of having to say for, let I equal 0, I is let, and give my condition and then my increment. I just have to say for I in range. And it's going to be easy for numbers. Now, the last thing I want to show you is we can do a for loop, not with range. Let's say we had a list. We got some list here. That's just 1 through 5. What I can do is say for I in some list. And instead of having to deal, one thing to note is if I am dealing with range, I am dealing with strictly a numerical value. Now, obviously this has numbers, but let's say that this was John, Jane, Jeff, Jack, and I don't know why I'm stuck on Jill. Okay. Now, if I'm dealing with range, let's kind of comment this out for a second. For I in range, again, it only deals with numbers, so I have to do a couple things, right? I have to handle, I have to pass in a number on when you want it to stop. So if I'm dealing with a list, the only numbers I have is the length or how many values are in there. So if I'm dealing with range and I run len, this is going to give me how many values. It will assure that I go through each one. The second thing is all I represents is just a number, right? It's starting at 0, going all the way up to this stop point. and it's going up by 1, unless we change it and pass it in, right? Pass in a different value. And so because all I have is a numerical number for I, what in a list, what part of a list has numbers? Anybody remember? When we're dealing with lists,
You said that part of the list, which part of the list has numbers?
yeah, what
The
part of the
index.
list?
Yeah,
It's the index.
index, yeah.
The index position, exactly, right? So anytime, because this was super confusing to me when I first learned, anytime you're dealing with a list and you're using range, all I is referring to is
Is the
the
index.
index position of each value. Therefore, if you wanted to print them off, you had to say some list of I, because I is just 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to the end of whatever, right? It's a little bit confusing, and that's what you had to do in JavaScript. Now, in Python, so you can do that, and this would work just fine. And we talk about this more in office hours. If you want more in-depth look, you can see that. If you want in Python, a little bit easier way is I can say for I, or in this case, let's call it name. This can be anything you want. It could be unicorn, it could be cupcake, tiger, it doesn't matter. In some list. Now, what this is doing is this is going through some list, and it's just assigning this value here to whatever we call this variable, just a temporary variable. So because I called this name, it's saying, okay, great. Instead of going through the index position, it's actually just taking the value here. In this case, it's John. And so I can print John. Then it's going to the next one. Jane. Name becomes Jane. Print name. And so on and so forth. We get John, Jane, Jeff, Jack, and Jill. So there's 2 different ways we could iterate through a for loop with it, and especially with a list. Just know that range is always associated with new numbers, right? And if we have a list, numbers with a list, we're just talking about index position. The other way we could do it is by doing it this way. And if we just do it this way and not use range, then we can get the actual value itself. The actual value itself. So there are 2 ways we could do for loops within this. Now, I don't believe you need to iterate through a dictionary for your homework. If you do, we talk about it in office hour, and we talk about the 3 different ways to iterate through a dictionary. That is there. I don't believe you need to do that. I think that's next week as well. So you should have everything you need for your homework. I know today was kind of like a water cannon. We had some pretty big topics to talk about. Are there any questions that you guys have for me where it's talking about for loops or functions, conditional statements, dictionaries, or lists? Any questions at all? I believe if we look
No,
at,
not really.
awesome. If we look at your, you have for loop basic, I believe is your core assignment, where you're printing all integers. We've just did that.
Yeah.
Multiples of 5. I'll give you a secret. There's something called a modulus or modulo that you might want to use for that. Print integers if divisible by 5. So we might just have some conditional statements within my for loop. We could do that. Add odd integers. We could do that. So we've kind of talked about every single one of these except modulo here, but that I'll give you guys that for homework to talk about the modulus. MODOULS. Oh. Modulus. Type done. Oh. Modulus. This one. I'll put this in the chat as well for you. I believe it's also on the platform, but just want to give that to you. Okay. Like I said, the lecture and the office hour will be up here. Other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I will stop the recording here, but if you guys have any questions, I will stick around. If not, I hope you guys have a wonderful night.